At the beginning of this year, I started to see the same thing coming up again and again on Twitter. The idea that we had lost the monarchy when we joined the European Economic Community in 1973. Hi, my name's Steve and I'm an expert on the European communities, and today we're going to look into the argument that the monarchy was ended when the UK joined the EEC. When I started to look into this, I was surprised at how prevalent this argument was.
Due to the UK surrendering sovereignty and joining the European Economic Community on the 1st of January 1973, sovereignty was surrendered, the monarch was deposed and given a change of title. Therefore, any Act of Parliament, statute and law implemented post 1st of January 1973 is treason.
The surge of interest at the beginning of the year was the result of a video by YouTuber Richard Vobes.
So I've been looking to all the people I can think of who are experts in their field, who put their case forward, sometimes for something, sometimes against something. And I use what I would call my common sense.
Apparently, Richard uses his channel to ask experts from one side or the other to decide what to believe. So who was Richard's expert for the show in question? A constitutional scholar, no doubt.
Now, you may remember 10 weeks ago, I think it was, we had a gentleman here, otherwise known as Rob the Rat Catcher, who was investigating Portsmouth City Council.
Rob the Rat Catcher. Rob's investigation into Portsmouth Council led to him trying to arrest a judge in court.
He attacked him.
You are an officer of the law.
Some might conclude that it didn't go so well. But Rob is not alone. He is working with someone who has spent a significant time investigating this.
Shall we move on to some of the evidence and stuff that you've...
Yeah, I'd like to show people what we've uncovered. This information comes in part from a gentleman called Ian Stewart, who's spent 24 years of his life looking at this information. We've only spent 4 of mine.
This is Ian Stewart.
That is the proof the Rothschilds are controlling this country.
Now we've established the experts, let's dive into the legal foundation of their argument.
So the UK justice, it's an illusion. There is no such a thing as justice in the United Kingdom. It's a fallacy. If you look at the top section, it's Magna Carta and it's the Charter of Freedoms. Now, a lot of people will argue that the Magna Carta only has 4 sections currently in the law books, and that's not true, because the Magna Carta on the 15th of June 1215 was sealed in perpetuity, which means it was sealed by a king's seal, King John, and King John sealed it forevermore. Multiple people have tried to change it, including some popes, believe it or not, because it was sealed in perpetuity by King John. But they can't change it. Once you've got a king's seal on a document, it's there forever.
Rob considers Magna Carta to be permanent because it has been sealed with the Great Seal. I'm not sure how this is relevant, but okay. For the sake of argument, let's just pretend that Sola Facia does not exist and just move on.
Right, okay, so the Magna Carta, as you've got there, sealed in perpetuity.
Yep. So there are 4 superior statutes in the United Kingdom. That means they supersede every other statute ever made. You've got the Coronation Act, 1688. You've got the Bill of Rights, 1689, the Act of Settlement in 1700. The Act of the Union is not a superior statute, but it was when Scotland joined England. I hasten to add, not voluntarily. The Treason Act of 1795, which is a superior statute, and the Act of the Union where Ireland joined the English and Scotland unity. When you look at those 4 superior statutes, they overrule everything else.
Again, I'm not sure why this is relevant. The case law surrounding superior statutes would not be applicable in 1972 because it didn't come about until 2002. Even then, they wouldn't be relevant because in the Alistair ruling of 2023, the Supreme Court asserted that any interpretive presumption cannot override the clearly expressed will of Parliament. It's also worth mentioning that the superior statutes cited by Judge Laws, the judge that invented the case law on superior statutes, are not exactly the same as the ones given by Rob. Those were Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, the Act of Union, the Reform Act, the Human Rights Act, the Scotland Act, the Government of Wales Act, and then Judge Laws states the European Communities Act was also a superior statute. There is only one other time I've seen the superior statutes being consistent with Ian Stewart's list.
The superior statutes of the 1688 Coronation Oath, the 1689 Bill of Rights, the 1700 Act of Settlement, and 1795 the Treason Act.
I'm still not sure why it's relevant, but never mind, because Rob then goes on to lay out a case for treason.
So when you look at the Verner Report, or Werner, I don't know how you pronounce it, because it was the Prime Minister of Luxembourg that wrote a letter to Edward Heath and Margaret Thatcher back in 1968 to 70. He wrote telling Edward Heath that if they joined the common market, it was going to be an act of treason against the British people.
The argument is that Pierre Verner, who studied economics and law in France, contacted the British Prime Minister to tell him to ignore the Attorney General and all the British legal experts because he knew better than all of them about what was involved in the publicly available Treaty of Rome. And when he did so, he copied in the Secretary of State for Education and Science because he obviously felt it really important to keep an Education and Science Minister in the loop on matters of treason.
So she was a junior minister at the time and he was the Prime Minister?
She wasn't a junior minister, she was the Secretary of State for Education and Science. It's on the cabinet meetings and everything. Margaret Thatcher's job aside, from Rob's document we can see the claim that the Verner Plan was hidden. Shall we see if that's true?
Vous dites l'horizon 1980 reste fixé. Cela pour une monnaie européenne éventuellement?
Oui, le cas échéant. Oui. En tout cas, pour la fixité des parités entre les monnaies européennes, ce qui équivaut pratiquement à une monnaie européenne.
That was the televised press conference of the Verner Report. And so that got publicity. Front page of The Guardian. The present proposals do not go so far as to outline a federal constitution, but they recognise that they imply the development of a political union. The Verner Plan was 31 pages, and the report given to the press was 31 pages. It makes it into the Daily Telegraph and into the Times. Economic and monetary union of the six means some loss of sovereignty. It also, however, lays great emphasis on the political implications of this move. Economic and monetary union, it declares, will serve to foment the development of political union in the community and will not be able, in the long run, to do without such union. A double-page spread in the Financial Times. Monetary union and a common currency imply a common budget, political union, and some form of European government. What about in Parliament? Well, Prime Minister was away talking to EFTA, but when he got back, they asked him about it. And then the government translated it and made it available to Parliament. In the following months, the Verner Plan will be referred to maybe about 90 times. The Guardian ran a story about a teach-in. That's when they bring people into Westminster and talk them through stuff. This one's the Verner Report, and there's Professor Keldor saying that political union must come before monetary union and not the other way around. And there were debates in the letter columns. 5 lecturers from Southampton University sent a letter saying this is a bad idea, and a Mr. Robert Sheaf replied with, what do experts know anyway? Mr. Sheaf quotes the Verner Plan, which means he might actually be the government, but also he may have just got it from the Bulletin of the European Communities because it is included as a supplement. Another important point to make is that the Verner Plan was DOA. It was too far-reaching for France. France and Germany end up arguing, which means that Britain is in a difficult position because they're trying to negotiate their way in. When the Verner Plan first came out, the government just said, we're not going to say anything positive, we're not going to say anything negative, we're going to wait until they've met formally and discussed it before we give any opinion. But what they did do was acknowledge the direction of travel. An example of this can be seen on the 9th of November 1970 when Edward Heath went on Panorama. He was asked about the anxiety caused by the Common Market Plan to become a single monetary union with a single currency by the end of the decade. And his reply was, this of course springs from the Verner Report, which hasn't yet been discussed, let alone accepted by the community as a whole. I think we better wait and see what the community's conclusions are, but obviously this is not going to be something which is going to happen overnight. The more the community has common rules and the economy is operated under those common rules, then of course, the closer it will come as far as monetary policy is concerned. The British government were guarded, but the Labour Committee for Europe were not. They published a pamphlet supporting the Verner Plan. Roy Jenkins called it the first serious attempt by any serious politician in this country to evaluate the implications of the Verner proposals, especially in relation to sterling and its reserve role. And now, to labour the point that the Verner Plan wasn't secret, it inspired our European scrutiny procedures. In a study of Select Committee procedure, it was decided that we needed sifting and scrutiny by a joint committee or a select committee of legislative proposals made by the Commission, and government policy on these and other community policy documents and statements, e.g. the Verner or Verner reports. A Verner report was also available to Parliament. It was about expanding the powers of the European Parliament. It covered things like co-decision in terms of the political union and the monetary union. And in it, you will find a resolution was passed on the 22nd of March 1971, establishing monetary union based on the Verner Report. It breaks down everything that was agreed, but the final stage of the Verner Plan had not been agreed. As you can see, it says the resolution does not incidentally refer to certain institutional proposals in the report. And then, in 1973, for the price of 73p net, you could buy this document from the stationery office, which refers to the famous Verner Report. So yes, it's a ridiculous idea that the Verner Plan was hidden. It was a very big story, and it was a developing story. Edward Heath couldn't hide it if he wanted to. There is a conspiracy theory that it was hidden, and now we know it wasn't hidden. What was the reason it was supposed to have been hidden?
Why would it be an act of treason?
Because Edward Heath did not have the power to take the United Kingdom or the monarch out of the judicial system of the United Kingdom into the European Union or the common market without a referendum.
Right.
And he did it knowing that it was treasonous, as did Margaret Thatcher.
A referendum was needed. Shall we see if that's true too? If you're looking for someone to say that a referendum was needed, you will not find it in Blackstone. Treaties are signed using the royal prerogative, and Blackstone was very clear on this. He said it's in one person's hand to make it strong and powerful and quick, and if this was in the hands of the committee, it would weaken us as a country. The IC would refer to Blackstone saying it sounded really great, but it's just not how it works. The IC would argue that it's in the hands of the Cabinet, and the Cabinet is in fact a committee. The only things you'll find about a referendum in Dicey are the reasons why it should never be in our constitution. And with Blackstone and Dicey out of the way, it all falls to one man, Raymond Blackburn. Raymond Blackburn argued that this was a treaty like no other treaty, that the government didn't have the power to sign it. And consequently, he took them to court. He lost the first case and then took it to the Court of Appeal. Her Majesty's judges, as the guardians of the British Constitution, should be asked to declare the constitutional position in relation to the government's application to sign the Treaty of Rome and join the common market, and that the treaty's provisions can be validly accepted only if a new constitution is adopted with the consent of the British people, Mr. Raymond Blackburn of Chiswick told the court. And he lost. Mr. Blackburn was quite right, so far as his lordship could judge, in saying that if this country should go into the common market, the significance of the treaty would commit at least the executive irreversibly to the joinder of the market, and further, that in some degree the sovereignty of these islands would be shared with others. The court ruling was that there was a separation of powers, and the Queen was just exercising hers. Lord Coleridge, Chief Justice, was quoted in Ruston G versus the Queen, 1876. She acted throughout the making of the treaty and in relation to each and every of its stipulations in her sovereign character, and by her own inherent authority, and as in making the treaty and performing the treaty she is beyond the control of municipal law, and her acts are not to be examined in her own courts. Now take a close look at this article. That exact same article was cut and glued and stapled onto a piece of paper and included in FCO 301048. Do you see it? And that was attached to a report from Sir Vincent Evans, one of the legal advisors, explaining how the courts had concluded it was legal to sign the Treaty of Rome, including some of the points that Blackburn made, which were the supremacy of law, automatic binding of law, and how our courts have got to follow the decisions of the European Court. But you won't find anything about the Bill of Rights, because that will be in FCO 301520. The 1972 archive. Because in 1972, Alan Ross McWhirter, one of the twins that wrote the Guinness Book of Records, took the government to court again. He accepted the Blackburn decision, but since the treaty had been signed, he said this had changed things, that the government were now in violation of the Bill of Rights. Like Blackburn, he lost, and he took it to the appeal court, and he lost again. The court was quick to point out that the Bill of Rights conferred on the Crown and maintained in them all the honours, styles, titles, regalities, prerogatives, powers, jurisdictions, and authorities to the same belonging and appertaining, and that those powers were conferred on William and Mary on the abdication of James II. So when the clauses of the Bill of Rights are read together, their effect was that there was in the Crown, as fully as ever it was, the prerogative of treaty-making power, which had succeeded from one generation to another down to today, and was certainly in the Queen through the executive government. There was nothing in the succeeding words on which Mr. McWhirter relied to limit it, so that even though the treaty had now been signed, the courts had no regard to the terms of treaties. They also refer to Attorney General for Canada versus Attorney General of Ontario. The stipulations of a treaty duly ratified do not within the Empire, by virtue of the treaty alone, have the force of law. But that isn't the end of the legal action. Mr. Louis Bradford took out a writ under the Act of Settlement 1701. He believed he had a lot of support, and he was going to take it all the way to the House of Lords. That was kicked out of court so hard, it hasn't landed yet. There is a conspiracy theory that a referendum was needed, and now we know the courts concluded there was no referendum needed. The other claim is about FCO 301048. Rob doesn't mention the issue on the programme, so I've had to go to Ian for it.
When you read the document that was buried for 30 years, he is told in the first 30 pages, you are losing sovereignty. But just to lose that much sovereignty is treason.
Apparently, even losing a little bit of sovereignty is treason. That being the case, so they kept that quiet.
I am absolutely prepared, not in a negative fashion, but constructively, to make a contribution of national sovereignty.
There is a conspiracy theory that any loss of sovereignty was a closely guarded secret. As we've seen from the Verner coverage and the Blackburn trial coverage, it was not. There is indeed an FCO 301048, legal and constitutional implications of UK entry into EEC. But there's also an FCO 74902, the legality of the UK claim to the Falkland Islands. But before you rush there to read it, it probably isn't that interesting. Originally, the public had no right of access to the stuff that the government filed, but that changed with the Public Record Act of 1958. This made records available to the public 50 years after they were filed, or, as it says in the Act, such other period either longer or shorter as the Lord Chancellor may, with the approval or at the request of the Minister or other person. Under the Public Records Act 1967, 50 years was changed to 30 years. Not everything that is filed is a report. Quite often they're folders like LCO 28678. The Treaty of Rome is not a normal treaty. In 1962, George Coldstream set up a subcommittee to look at producing a white paper to explain the constitutional issues. Since it wasn't published before the veto, it seems that it was reconvened in 1966, and then in 1967, it was published. Here it is on page 2 of the Daily Mirror. It was quite a big story. And it was presented to Parliament at the start of the Great Common Market debate of that same year. And that meant, during the implementation of the European Communities Act, when Clause 2 became controversial,
there was no concession in the wind-up speech on Clause 2 over this vital question of sovereignty.
You could read it was the crux of the Community Bill, and that there was nothing new in this principle. It had been set out in the White Paper of 1967. So if that was set out in 1967, what's FCO 301048? Well, I think you'll find it's a folder like FCO 30157, an FCO 3707, an FCO 301520, an FCO 32381. So what can you find in FCO 301048? You'll find things like written answers to questions in Parliament, like this one from Arthur Lewis. It's important to remember that just because it's in an FCO file doesn't mean that it didn't make it out to the public in another form. In FCO 301048, you'll also find this letter. It's from John Derrick, and it says, "I'm really worried about the sovereignty. Actually, the real purpose of this letter is to get gallery tickets." There is a note from Anne saying, tell him that it's really difficult to get tickets, along with what looks like the official reply. Just because it was put away for 30 years doesn't mean it's really sensitive, it just means it was filed. FCO 301048 also has some policy stuff, like this section here that says, what is clear is that regardless of the fundamental but uncertain problems touched on above, the sovereignty issue comprehends a number of real problems on which there is a public uneasiness. These problems will need to be dealt with and to be explained to Parliament and the public, both before we join and continuously thereafter. So not really pushing the secrecy angle there. I wouldn't worry about the Falkland Islands just yet. Remember, if this was sensitive, they could have made it 50 years, 100 years, but this is just in for the standard, unremarkable 30 years. As was FCO 301048. So having established the superior statutes are not relevant, that the Verner Report wasn't hidden, that the constitutional implications were published, that the court ruled it was legal to sign the Treaty of Rome without a referendum, and it wasn't treason, let's look at the legal claims around the Queen. First claim is that the county councils were made body corporates in 1972. Here are the relevant sections of the video where Rob lays out that claim.
The Local Government Act of 1972 made all councils in the United Kingdom corporations. And that, which surprised me, I couldn't find out why, but now I know, it was in preparation for joining the European Union on the 1st of January 73.
So they had to be corporations as opposed to bodies of men.
They couldn't be attached to they couldn't be attached to the English judicial system. Again, this is the Local Government Act of 72, which makes all councils corporations.
Oh right, okay. Sorry.
He goes on to claim that the Queen was removed from monarchy and made head of the UK corporation. Here are the relevant sections from the video.
So Edward Heath took us out of the or took us into the common market on January the 1st, 1973, and in doing so, he removed the rights of the Queen. The Queen was deposed on January the 1st, 1973 by Edward Heath.
So just go back there. The Queen in 1973, you said that she lost her powers.
Yeah, she was deposed.
Deposed.
She was deposed from monarch and she was made head of state. Head of state means head of corporation. Head of corporation means she was the head of...
the Crown Corporation?
Yeah, Crown Corporation, yeah. Yeah, she was head of the actual corporation itself, the UK company.
Okay, so I don't dispute Charles is the head of a corporation. I also don't dispute that in the UK, local governments are corporations. County councils, parish councils, district councils, I don't dispute that. But what I do dispute is that the monarchy, the county councils and the parish councils were made body corporates in 1973, and it was done because we were joining the European communities. I think it's time we looked at the legal history. The Local Government Act of 1972 does clearly say that the county and district councils will be body corporates. Each council mentioned in subsection 1 or 2 above shall be a body corporate by the name the county council or the district council. But what about the Local Government Act of 1888? The council of each county shall be a body corporate by the name of the county council. It does appear the county councils were body corporates long before 1972. Parish councils came under the Local Government Act of 1894. Every parish council shall be a body corporate. Local government in Britain was published in 1955 by the Government Central Office of Information. This is what it says about corporations. Nearly all local authorities are what are known as corporations, which means they have continuous existence, irrespective of their personnel, and have the power to hold property as though they were individuals. For a better description of corporations, we can look at Giles Jacobs' Common Law Dictionary. Corporation is a body politic or incorporate, so called as the persons are made into a body and of capacity to take and grant, etc. Of corporations, some are sole, some aggregate, sole when in one single person, as the king, a bishop, dean, etc. That's almost word for word from Edward Coke's report, volume 5. Sole person as the king, bishop, parsons, etc. So the monarchy has been a corporation for quite a while. Probably beginning in the 1561 case of the Duchy of Lancaster in the reports of Plowden, 412 years before we joined the European communities. It says, "For the king has in him two bodies, a body natural and a body politic." If we now go back to Giles Jacobs' Law Dictionary and look under the Great Seal, we can see it says, For the king is by interpretation of law a corporation, and passeth nothing but by the Great Seal, which is as the public faith of the kingdom in the high item and reputation justly attributed thereto. So why is the monarchy a corporation? For one thing, it has rights, like the right to own land. And not just rights, it has two things all corporations have: perpetual succession, as in it doesn't die, and it has artificial succession. There is a definitive work on the common law of corporations by Stuart Kidd. It was written in 1793, and it gives good examples of these. If the king die, leaving no son, but 2 daughters, the land he had to him and his heirs shall go to the eldest, though in the case of a common person, they would have gone to both. Normal inheritance laws do not apply to the monarchy. This is called artificial succession. But what about perpetual succession? The reasons around perpetual succession can be found elsewhere in Kidd under civil corporations, because the monarchy isn't a private corporation. It's not for profit. It's not in commerce. Corporations can be civil as well as private. Thus, a corporate capacity is given to the king to prevent, in general, the possibility of an interregnum or vacancy of the throne, and to preserve the entire possessions of the crown, for immediately on the demise of one king, his successor is in full possession of the regal rights and dignity. So while the body natural dies, the body corporate lives on for the next body natural. Legally, the monarchy exists forever. It then goes on to say, other civil corporations are established for local government, such as the corporations of cities and towns. There we have it. Local governments have been based on corporations for a very long time. They are civil corporations and therefore are not in commerce either. Now, if we go back to the 1950s local government document we saw earlier, we learn something interesting. The corporations of local government differ. The body corporate may be the council or it may be the whole of the local government electors, depending on the terms of the Act of Charter. For an example, we can look at the Second Charter of Elizabeth, being the first charter of definite incorporation, dated 15th of February 1600. We will ordain, constitute, grant, and declare that our borough of Portsmouth aforesaid shall be and remain from henceforth for ever a free borough aforesaid of itself, and that the inhabitants in the borough aforesaid for ever hereafter may and shall be one body corporate and politic in deed, fact, and name by the name of the mayor and burgesses of the borough of Portsmouth, and then by the name of the mayor and the burgesses of the borough of Portsmouth one body corporate and politic really and fully for us our heirs and successors. We do by these presents erect, make, ordain, and create, and that by the same name they may have perpetual succession. Which means, if you live in Portsmouth, you are part of the corporation. Going all the way to the bottom of this really, really, really long document, we can see it was sealed in perpetuity with the royal seal, just like the Magna Carta. In fact, some of these corporations predate the Magna Carta, like Barnstable's Corporation. It was first incorporated by Henry I. These corporations were offered to the different local areas, and the people agreed to them to get some relief from the feudal system. The creation of this corporation was going to allow them to collectively have more control of the local area and no longer have to rely on the Lord's Court, a court that was often seen as inherently corrupt. You could therefore argue this was a contractual relationship, and the boroughs that didn't take up the offer of corporation tended to be rotten boroughs. Now, with that knowledge, we can go back to 1972 to wonder why the district councils were made body corporates. In a related Hansard debate, we can find the line, the government's principal objective in the amendments is to permit the retention of existing rights and privileges enjoyed by many ancient towns and cities insofar as it is practicable within the framework of the new local government system contained in the bill. I suspect the main reason was to allow district councils to own property. He mentions ancient rights, which is a good point. London was a corporation without ever having a charter of incorporation. It didn't have the same feudal system and already had local government. It was, therefore, recognised as a corporation by prescription. In common law, if you looked like a corporation and you acted like a corporation, you were a corporation, although the authority to be a corporation still came from the monarchy. London is a corporation by prescription, but though a corporation may be by prescription, it shall be intended that it did originally derive its authority by grant from the king, for the king is the head of the Commonwealth, and all the Commonwealth in respect of him is but one corporation, and all other corporations are but limbs of the greater body. The Commonwealth, the monarchy, the councils, it's civil corporations all the way up and all the way down. And while the monarchy was originally by prescription, a major constitutional statute would formalise the institution's corporation status. That statute being, of course, the Bill of Rights. To whose princely persons the royal state, crown and dignity of the said realms with all honours, styles, titles, regalities, prerogatives, powers, jurisdictions and authorities to the same belonging and appertaining are most fully, rightfully and entirely invested and incorporated, united and annexed. That's the ownership stuff. All and every person and persons that is, are or shall be reconciled to or shall hold communion with the See or Church of Rome, or shall profess the Popish religion, or shall marry a Papist, shall be excluded and be forever incapable to inherit, possess or enjoy the crown. That's your artificial succession, or which their majesties are contended, and pleas shall be declared, enacted and established by authority of this present Parliament, and shall stand, remain, and be the law of this realm forever. That is the perpetual succession. There you go. The Bill of Rights makes it clear the monarchy is a corporation, leaving me wondering what some people think this word means. Finally, the jurisdiction of the court is laid out in Article 177 of the Treaty of Rome. Section C lays out the only requirement of the UK judicial system, that a court can request a ruling. Alternatively, if the case reaches the highest court, then the case must be brought before the ECJ for a binding preliminary ruling. The ECJ doesn't make the final ruling. That is the national court. However, because the preliminary ruling is binding, the member state court may find they have no freedom to manoeuvre. In summary, local governments have been formal corporations since at least the 12th century. The monarch has been considered a corporation since the 16th century. There are civil corporations, they are not for profit, they are not in commerce. And the European communities did not require anything to happen to the Queen or our legal system other than those stated in the Treaty of Rome. It seems nobody has explained to Richard there is a difference between civil corporations and private corporations.
Your council is not even who you think it is. These are a corporate business, not an authority, not in the way that you imagine that you have voted a bunch of people in your area to do the administration and make your life much better by organising someone to collect the bins and ensuring there's street lighting and filling in the potholes and making sure that there are amenities like libraries and theatres and cinemas and all those things that we think that we would desire.
He wants councils to provide local services like libraries and public parks. But just like the monarchy has various rights attached, or should I say incorporated, the 1888 Local Government Act shows that the rights given to the local council corporations are ownership of land, something they need to do if they're going to offer libraries and public parks. So I think the best way to conclude this is to go back to the 1954 description. Nearly all local authorities are known as corporations, which means they have continuous existence irrespective of personnel, and have the power to hold property as if they were individuals. Body corporate may be the council, or it may be the whole of the local government electors, depending on the terms of the Act or Charter. So the answer is the monarchy wasn't made a corporation in 1973, it was already a corporation. That's the end of the video, thanks for watching.